Welcome to a highlight Jeebus video now r/Askreddit. Hey Reddit, what are some of your small town WTF stories? I'll start. I was an EMT for a small company. One of our trucks hit a deer in a neighboring jurisdiction. Argument ensued about who got to keep the deer. Man on meth throws cash register at store clerk. After pursuit that ends when he is captured on the roof of the bowling alley. He ends up in the hospital for having broken an ankle running. Tiny emergency room means he is placed in one of the two neighboring beds, the other being occupied by the store clerk. Hilarity ensues. I remember we had this old guy we called the Gum Man. He would hang out in the local Piggly Wiggly, a grocery store, all day and ask little kids if they had gone to church that week. If you told him you had, he'd give you a piece of gum. It was only later in life that I found out that he wouldn't give any gum to black kids, only white. After typing this all out, I realized how creepy the whole thing actually was. My rural Washington state town was one of those little pockets of bigotry that people forget exist. In the Northwest, we had precisely one Jewish family for a while, but they moved away soon after. An elementary school teacher told one of their little girls that she and her family had killed Jesus. We also had exactly one black police officer, out of around 4 total, who was constantly treated terribly and assigned to shit work until they finally fired him for no good reason. There's still a lawsuit pending about that, I believe, and in both of these instances, someone wrote an anonymous letter to the local paper saying that the assholes involved represented the silent majority of the town. We also had the typical hillbilly meth problem that made headlines when our Soul 3 unit apartment complex blew up in the middle of our minuscule downtown area. Then there was the time that the local pagan family decided to do a midnight ritual on a railroad bridge and they all got hit by a train. You can imagine what the silent majority thought about that business. On top of all that, our high school mascot was a potato. We had a dog run for mayor, and Lewis and Clark mentioned us in their journals as the place where they got a particularly shitty night's sleep. Small town in central, southern Ill. A man's horse died and he hadn't yet taken it to the dump. Some drunk rednecks got together about a week after it died and decided they should take it instead. They tied it behind their truck and started dragging it to the dump, but decided it would be more fun to drag it around the square a few times. Was fine until the skin tore and it started leaking horse fluid and parts all over the pavement. My hometown has an endless supply of these stories. Every spring my hometown has a livestock festival, a week-long celebration of livestock. One lucky high school girl is crowned the livestock queen and presides over the festivities. A prestigious position, to be sure. During the livestock week, tickets are sold to an event called Cow Patty Bingo, in which an indoor showroom is divided into over 100 small squares and a cow is released onto the floor. If you are lucky enough to have the cow shit into the square you had chosen, you, my friend, are a winner. Grew up in a little town in Alaska. April 1st, 1974. A dude hired a helicopter to bring hundreds of old tires to the dormant volcano that can be seen from town. He set them on fire, scaring the shit out of everybody. http www.sitka.com/porky/porky2.htm. I was offered $50 to cast a curse on NASCAR. One of my friend's uncle, let's call him Rob, acquired a pet raccoon. He named it Cuddles and one day she went missing. So he goes out to the road to check to see if she had been hit by a car. Sure enough, there was the raccoon, obviously dead. He picks up the raccoon, brings her back to his house, then starts to dig a grave for it. During this time, Rob is calling all his friends and family, inviting them out for a funeral for his dead raccoon. We all show up with food and beer. Rob is crying and finishing up burying the dead raccoon when suddenly Cuddles shows up and starts tugging on his pant leg while he was shoveling. Now we were all already out there with food and beer, so instead of a funeral we had a celebration for the return of Cuddles. Party included beer, a band, and a pig roast. Rob and Cuddles are often seen together at the various mud bogs my town has. If you don't know what a mud bog is, it's when you drive your usually big-ass pickup truck through a pit of mud and see how far it can be driven through before it gets stuck. Also involves a lot of drinking. Cuddles. Edit. More small-town stories. My grandfather, who I lived with when I was a young child, used to play pranks on us. One of his favorites was to go down the road and pick up possums, then place them in boxes. He would then tell us he had gotten us a surprise and to slowly open the box. Scare the crap out of me seeing a possum playing dead staring up at me. Finally, the umpteenth time of him doing this, I had learned not to open boxes from him anymore. I got a parking ticket for $5 for blocking a sidewalk. When I didn't pay it in time, they added on a $2 late fee. High school classmate brought to school a decaying human skull he found on his farm. He wasn't sure what it was. It came from a man who'd been murdered in the winter, then stuffed into a drainage tube on this guy's farm. When spring came, thawing snow and rain washed the remains out into the clearing where he found the skull. My hometown once had its major roads shut down because a rafter of wild turkeys decided to hang out in the street for a day. I lived next to a farm in Siler City, NC. One day as a kid, I walked down the road to explore under the bridge on my road. To my surprise, I found a bag full of rotten cow carcasses. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona in the 80s. As a kid, one of my favorite places to go with my father was Ruff's Guns and Liquor. And it was exactly what it sounds like, a combination gun and liquor store. Edit. Another Flagstaff story. There was a small airport outside the town. Very small. In the morning, the elk would come through the tree line and lay on the asphalt runway because it was warm this year. So every morning a bunch of guys would go out to the runway and basically run around screaming and clapping and flailing their arms to chase the elk away so that the airplanes could do what they do. Mostly taking off, landing, and occasionally sliding into a field. Eventually the elk got used to that. So then, they figured out one guy could go out, fire a shotgun into the trees, and the elk would take off. Then they got used to that. So it ended up, every morning these guys would go out to the runway and basically kick, hit, and generally harass these elk until they finally got sick of it and wandered off. This went on for years until some genius, obviously not a local boy, came along and determined that putting up a ducking fence might go a long way in alleviating the Flagstaff-Pulliam Airport's elk problem this year. So, my family is visiting my uncle in middle of nowhere, KS, at the family farm where my dad grew up. As luck would have it, I have to have my appendix removed. This sucks, because I was a boy of 11 and the big fun of visiting my uncle on his farm is the go-karts and motorbikes. And now all I can do is shoot the .22 because of the stitches. So, we need to go to the hardware store in the small town of 500 people to buy .22 rounds. I walk in with my dad and immediately go to the counter. The guy looks at me and says, "How are you feeling?" I say, "Huh?" He says, "You had your appendix removed." "Okay," says I. Now I have never met this man before, nor been in his store, and we've only been in the store for barely 5 minutes. The man laughed. "You're wondering how I knew? Lol. So I read in the newspaper that J-Boy 55, the name of my grandfather too, was admitted in the hospital for an appendix being removed, and I thought it was your grandfather. Then I remember hearing that your father was visiting and his son's name was John. Then you and your dad came in. I recognized him from when he used to come in, and I figured you were the one with the appendix removed. As we left, I asked my dad, "When was the last time you were in this store?" Dad: 30 years ago, when I was 8 inches. Edit. OMG. My username is jboy55. And my first name is John. As if you couldn't have guessed if you thought about it. Edit number 2. I am now the age my father was. Yikes. This was way before HIPAA. Edit number 3. No, he did not say LOL. He laughed out loud. I once lived in a small town in the Appalachians, and I have a story somewhat similar to yours. The town was too small to support any kind of hospital, but they had a diner that functioned as both the local watering hole and the doctor's office. The doctor owned the place and also served as the main cook. You could sit at the bar next to someone and not know if they were getting something to eat, or if they were about to get inoculated. This town was very, very small and remote. The schoolhouse I went to is the smallest public school in that state by a long shot. The senior class. This school went K-12, and still only had about 40 kids. Not all of them lived in the town. Did a family tree project and discovered that they were all related. Not even distantly. It was like third cousin or something. The punchline. They still held promise. Also, our neighbor, who lived somewhat close as the crow flies, but about 45 minutes driving through mountains, gave my mom her old wood-fired range because she had just been hooked up with electricity and didn't need it anymore. Keep in mind that this was the mid-90s. I have too many stories about that place and the crazy folks who lived there. I didn't think any towns like that still existed, but they're out there. They're kind of like time capsules. Edit. I have received several requests for an AMA. I think this would be pretty cool, so I will work on clearing my schedule out a bit so I can do it right. No promises, but I think that would be fun. Thanks for watching Highlight Jeebus video, mate. Make sure to smash that like button for more high quality content.